Hello, my name is Tim Terrell. I'm a professor at Emory Law School in Atlanta, and I'm here to do this presentation on a somewhat unusual topic, this idea of lawyer professionalism. And what I'm going to be doing during the course of what will seem, I suppose, like 17 hours, the next 2 hours, in this program is to work through my understanding of the concept of professionalism, why I think it's important, and what its content might be. And there is a set of materials there for you to take a look at. The first part of the materials is an outline of the topics that I intend to cover over this couple of hours. But there are also some hypothetical situations that end that series of material, and I want to take you through those hypotheticals as efficiently as possible. My preference, of course, would be to make this kind of presentation, and when I do these presentations, to make them as interactive as possible, because I would love to be able to have an audience that is responding to the points I'm making, or they agree, disagree with the way in which I approach this topic and how I understand the topic. That won't be terribly possible in the context of this presentation. We will have 15 minutes at least, something like 10-15 minutes at the end of my presentation, in which the opportunity will be there for you to phone in questions or type in questions that I might be able to respond to, at least as far as I can after this thing is actually presented. And I can at least be able to interact with you somewhat on some perspectives that you might have. But sadly for this thing, the first hour or so is going to be me presenting my perspective on and content on professionalism. And then the second half of this thing will be working through some of those hypotheticals, and I'll just try to raise some of the points that I think are interesting. Now, in that set of materials, let me note for you, on the very first page, there is a listing of 4 articles that I have done that are related to this topic of professionalism that kind of lay out my view of the way this thing comes together. The first of these articles, that Rethinking Professionalism, is the one that is primarily responsible for a lot of the content that you see here in this outline. A lot of that is worked through in a fair amount of detail in that first piece. The second article in that list is actually sort of a fun piece, that thing called A Tour of the Wine Country, is I try to take the concept of professionalism and apply it to law schools, raising odd topics like what is the nature of professionalism for a law professor, what is the nature of professionalism for a law student, where it almost never seems to be applied. And I'll talk about that as we have perhaps some opportunity and time during the presentation that you're going to be hearing. The last of those articles in that list is the most recent, and it is one that is quite long. It's over 100 pages, working through not just the substance of professionalism again in various ways, adding some content to it, some discussion, but also that's the place where I work through the hypotheticals that you see here in this set of materials, but also others. So if you wanted to get a take fully on the way in which I work through these things, that final article might be the most interesting for the crowd that might be suffering through this. So let me kind of take you through this step by step. As I said, we go to the second page of my materials, which is the presentation outline. And I want to take you step by step over the way in which I have approached this topic and why, as I said, I happen to think that it's important. I got involved in this topic of professionalism simply because of where I come from in large measure, and that's Georgia. And Georgia was the first state, and is almost the only state, that has a separate CLE requirement in professionalism. As I understand it, Hawaii has now gone to a 3-hour annual professionalism requirement, which I find fascinating. They're going to have a tough time finding things to talk about there on a regular basis. But nevertheless, Georgia has had a 1-hour professionalism requirement and a 1-hour ethics requirement for a long time. And most states don't make that kind of differentiation. If you're doing anything that has to do with the values of the profession one way or the other, it's counted as ethics credit by and large, and there's no separation out there for this idea of professionalism. But Georgia, quite a while ago, decided that it would set up this separate thing. They indeed have a professionalism commission in Georgia that is meant to set up various programs and things for lawyers in that state to work through. And so one of the big difficulties that I encountered when I first began to, as a professor, to do CLE programs on this topic was always getting hit with the question of what is it we're talking about? What is the nature of professionalism as opposed to legal ethics? You know, what is that differentiation, and what is the nature of the definition of professionalism? And it's a tough thing to kind of pull together, but that's where we're going to end up starting this whole thing, as you can see in my outline. The challenge, first of all, in this whole thing is to come up with some kind of a definition. What are we talking about when we talk about professionalism? It seems to be something that is above in some way. It is sort of aspirational. It's above the level of ethics in some way. But exactly what does this mean?